We are rounding the bend here. We got one final conversation and then a word presentation after that. I want to invite two leaders of a company called STAX, Edward Norton, the Chief Strategy Officer, and Mike Walker, the CEO of STAX, to come and join me on stage.
Good to see you, man.
Good to see you. Mike, welcome.
Good to see you.
Yeah. All right. Well, we've known each other for a while in different forms and iterations. You guys have partnered on, co-founded a couple different companies, which we'll talk about STAX in a second. But I want to talk about, well, I should also say, Edward and I remember going up to Sacramento with you in like 2004.
For the million solar roofs. We were lobbying for the million solar roofs initiative.
And trying to get money for affordable housing, dedicated to affordable housing, which we succeeded on. It was a great victory. Yeah, definitely. All right, so for those that don't know, the ports of LA and Long Beach are enormous economic drivers in our region, directly and indirectly through the economy. And also, the goods movement through the ports of LA and Long Beach represent, in aggregate, the largest source of air and climate pollution in our region. And so what does that mean? There's trucks, and LACI spent a lot of time working on, before that, when I worked for Mayor Garcetti, on how do we get electric trucks to replace those dirty diesel drayage trucks that pick up the containers of goods, take them to the warehouse. And then there's the trains, a little harder to decarbonize than the trucks. Trucks aren't any small feat, but how do we start on those short routes? And we've been putting in charging infrastructure. Quick shout out, LACI partnered with the Port of Los Angeles is going to be putting in, along with other funding partners, the first publicly available for truck drivers, charging depot at the Port of Los Angeles, and that'll be in place by 2028, we hope. But then you got the trains, and you get the cargo handling equipment, and then you have the ships. And for those who don't know, ships that bring those containers in and other goods use the dirtiest source of fuel in the world, bunker fuel. It's just nasty, and we want to make sure that the air of those athletes that 20 times the rate of a normal human being will breathe in isn't polluted by that nasty bunker fuel that those ships burn, let alone the diesel pollution from the trucks and the trains and the cargo handling equipment. And there's a lot of progress being made. But ships are really hard to tackle. And that's why I'm so excited about this conversation, because as we, an Australian billionaire has funded the first green ammonia container ship, but it's one of one, and it's going to take a long time to really decarbonize the ships themselves. So STAX is solving the problem, putting their device, I'll let you talk more about the details, on top of that smokestack and preventing those pollutions, the NOx and SOx polluting the lungs of our communities. And so it's not just about the athletes, about those frontline communities in San Pedro and Wilmington, along the 710, near the ports, that suffer from that air pollution. So thank you both for what you're doing with this solution. I'm going to start with you, Mike. Tell us a little bit more about the specific problem STAX is solving, and why is capturing emissions right at the source an important strategy on the road to zero emissions?
Yeah, I was going to say you're hired from the start, right? I think the most important number that comes out to me is 44,000. I remember the first time I was presented this opportunity at STAX. And the idea is that there's 44,000 cars in emissions in a single day visit for a vessel at berth. And in LA Long Beach alone, that's somewhere around 6 million cars a day. And I was shocked as a native Californian that those weren't being handled at all. They were just going off into our local communities, where I think everybody here understands PM and NOx, particulate matter NOx, really bad to ingest, and you have increased rates of cancer and heart disease and asthma and dementia, and they land disproportionately in our disadvantaged communities. And so until the at-birth regulation came on, which is the California Air Resource Board, and I know Steve was here this morning and previously led by Richard Corey, they came up with the at-berth regulation, which is a regulation that requires vessels, when they come into port, to either plug into shore power or to use a technology like STAX, which reaches up and captures that emission right at the stack itself. And so those emissions come down through our system, and where they're treated through a processing unit, where we take out the PM and the NOx, and then clean air is going out the tailpipe instead of having that drift over neighborhoods and schoolyards. So currently we'll do about 20,000 hours this year alone in emission capture across 8 vessels and 4 ports. And our business is scaling up as we address Northern California ports as well. We capture tankers, auto carriers, and containers. And the other exciting news, we understand in California the market really is for us is around pollutants, PM and NOx. But we also understand there's a much bigger picture out there with CO2 capture. And so in April this year, we actually combined our PM NOx processing unit with a CO2 capture system. And we did that on auto carriers and containers. And actually this week alone, we'll be doing 2 tests on tankers. And why that's important, and your lead-in was great, is we fully understand that we're 20 to 30 years out from alternative fuel sources. I was at London Shipping Week at Euroports. You know, there's a big effort for this. It's moving forward, but the distribution network and the supply chain, it's just going to take a while. And those other emissions that are going to be driven by diesel are still going to be out there. And so when you have a solution like what we're able to do, which is can be up and running in 6 months and can capture CO2, it's a really interesting story for at-birth zero emission solution for a long term.
That's great. It's Steve Cliffs here, and just it's Executive Office of CARB. You know, and I often say policymakers send market signals to entrepreneurs, and that's what CARB did with this at-birth regulation. And speaking of entrepreneurs, Edward, many people may not know this, but you're a serial entrepreneur. You've co-founded or founded several companies, and this is one of them. Talk to us a little bit about what is important about STAX's solution. Like, because some people think, well, can't they just ships plug into the electricity at the port when they get in there, and why is this solution so important?
Yeah, I mean, let me just pause on something you passed over, but I think it's really important to lean into, which is, you know, to say that this company is a California incubated company is an understatement. You know, we're in an era where a lot of people like to flay government. You know, even when great American car company like Tesla gets built by government loans, and people tend to forget about that. I want to really highlight California once again with the at-birth regulations has really demonstrated the art of the possible, not just in the United States, but for the whole world, by crafting a very smartly calibrated, ramping environmental regulatory regime, but then with a very efficient amount of grant money in a Tech Accelerator Grant Award, which is what launched our company won CARB's Tech Accelerator Grant for emission capture and control. STAX now, as Mike said, operates 8 maritime vessels, soon ramping to 20, institutionally financed, already vaulted beyond California into Port of Southampton, UK, Rotterdam calling us, Canada calling us. So now you have a global industrial services company launched by the CARB grant, launched by California's regulatory program, that is now the leading company bringing that technological service to the global shipping industry, and on a daily basis is now treating container ships, auto carriers, tankers, and eliminating 100% of those emissions. And this is happening, you know, this has been carefully kind of price tested, price analyzed by CARB, by STAX, by our industry partners. And lo and behold, it turns out, because everybody's focused on affordability, it's actually cost neutral to most of our customers, because the auto carriers, for instance, have realized, hey, we have 5,000 cars on this vessel, we're paying $40,000 at a visit, we'll pass it through. It's a couple bucks per vehicle, and it turns out the OEMs are actually happy about it because they want supply chain cleanup certification, as do the container carriers. And in terms of the oil services thing, everybody cares about price at the pump, they care about affordability. Literally, the at-birth regulation by the data delivers something like a half a cent per gallon to the cost. So you literally have, you have a cost and price tested regime, you have a proven technology, now scaled up. And all of that came because bipartisan administrations in the state of California, Republican and Democratic alike, passed the at-birth regulations, CARB enforced them, incentivized a tech company to help solve that problem. And this is what we need more of, not less of. We need good. And when people try to trot out and say, oh, you know, these things aren't technologically proven, well, 30 of the biggest shipping liners in the world, including the oil services, are contracted with us and are contracting for the rollout in 2027. So, and it's happening on a daily basis. We think, you know, not only do you not want to snatch defeat from the jaws of victory, but with something like 2028 coming, when you say, like, well, what's the story you want to tell in 2028? What we want is Olympic athletes in the city of LA not breathing one single iota of NOx and particulate, because the Port of LA is emission-free. And that will happen. In 2027, the full implementation of this at-birth regulation will cover all ports and all classes of vessel in the state of California. And we will be eliminating all of that, which is an unbelievable story that people are not fully hip to how successful this has been. And everyone from Schwarzenegger and Terry Tamminen and Gavin and Steve and everybody who's been involved in this should be taking a victory lap and a bow, because when we go to Rotterdam and we go to London, people refer to the California standard. We need to replicate the California standard. We're going to build a voluntary matrix in Southampton that replicates the CARB standard. I mean, what more could you want? What better demonstration of California showing the art of the possible? And when the global community shows up here in 2028, you have a story where the ports are emission-free. What an incredible success, you know?
Yeah, it's true. And that's really what you just said, Edward, is at the core of why we're doing this summit, is to tell that very story of how California and LA's policy leadership has led to the kind of entrepreneurship that you're talking about, and how we've stood up. And what model can that share with the world? Right now we're working with the city of New York to put in an indirect source rule, something that AQMD and CARB have put in place out in the Inland Empire for reducing emissions at the warehouses. And now New York is going to try to replicate that. So what else can we share with these models of success that you're talking about, and you guys embody that?
You know, because you work so hard on the overall electrification challenge and agenda in the port, I think it's really worth pointing out too that, look, if we knew before that electrons aren't infinite, we know it for sure now because the hyperscalers of the world are going to toxify this country with their gas turbine baseload, you know, because they can't find the power they need for these data centers, right? The whole idea that the shipping industry and the ports at large are going to electrify, just that mirage just got totally blown away in the last 5 years. It means that every incremental bit of power that the ports can actually acquire, let alone clean power, needs to go to something, and it's not infinite. So if the at-birth regulation can be met with a non-electrification solution like STAX, what does that mean in the Port of Richmond? They can use the available power supply they can get for other forms of electrification. So we think the at-birth regulation handled by emission capture, like STAX, actually leverages the power supply you need for all of the other solutions like drayage and these things we need to figure out. And that's really important because it's not an infinite pie. We got to use it smartly, and I think that that's not to mention the fact that in truth, to get down in the weeds, shippers don't want to take their boats offline and retrofit them for shore power, and tankers don't ever want to do that because they're floating bombs, right? So you've got to have something other than this kind of glib idea that every boat's just going to plug into a plug. Yeah. And the shore, it's not going to happen. It's just absolutely not going to happen. So you know, those, you know, you got to look at these things are, like you said, they're an ecosystem and they need to interact. But we really think that the story of how successful the state policy on CARB's implementation of it, and by the way, if we're talking about affordability, there's affordability at the pump. There's also the affordability of cancer, right? And we're talking about lowering billions of dollars of healthcare cost structure if you can eliminate what these ports are delivering into the, not just their immediate adjacent communities, but the state at large. I mean, you're talking literally billions of dollars of healthcare savings,
Tens of thousands of lives.
Yeah, and that is especially exciting when you think about the fact that the cost to the industry itself is essentially nominal.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mike, talk to us a little bit. So we got the story, let's say the world arrives, and one of the great stories it's told is how CARB put this regulation in place and STAX responded, and the benefits to not just the athletes, but to the communities surrounding the ports, whether it's LA, Long Beach, or up in Richmond. But people are going to come here, want to see that story. Where do you see STAX going next? What are the opportunities for other types of applications and problems you can solve? And how do you scale to get there?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think that when you start to run a business, you put your head down and you start, delivering and cranking, and you get involved in what you're doing, you're building the business. And then one day you kind of pick your head up and go, wow, look what we've created. And that's where we really are right now. And part of that process is letting everybody know that this is an option, right? This is a viable solution. Throughout the world, Ed was talking about the electron issue. They're stumped everywhere. There's shore power was kind of thought of as this panacea where everybody could just come and plug in, because it's super elegant if you think about it. The challenge is with infrastructure, time, cost, electrons, it's just not a solution that's going to scale. And so for us, the message that we get when we go to, whether it's Europe or Asia, is like, well, gee whiz, we didn't know that this technology existed. And so for us to get the word out, to have this conversation, and to allow people to understand that this is the solution going forward. If you can't get a shore power in, there's an opportunity here to address both your pollutants that we talked about that are critical today, and then have a long-term strategy for your carbon capture. I mean, this is a full layout map of how to do it. You have a little room for shore power, great, do it there. And the other thing that Ed had mentioned is that, there's 100,000 vessels out there. I would guess maybe under 1% have shore power capabilities. So the reality is all coming together now into what the future holds if we're going to try to do carbon capture. You can't do it with shore power. Alternative energy is taking its time to come in there. And so we fill what I see as a sizable gap. So when you talk about scaling, it's getting that message when everybody comes in here and they can see like, hey, LA and Long Beach, carbon capture, pollutants. I mean, that's the home run. And I think it's going to be a nice message for people to receive. Additionally, we all know data warehousing is blowing up right now, and part of the requirement of data warehousing is you have to have all these backup gensets that are run constantly, because you don't want your iCloud or whatever to go down, right? So you always have to be firing these gensets off, and so they cause a huge issue with pollutants. So there's a whole arm of STAX that's focused on addressing the data warehousing pollution need. So it's an incredibly exciting time for us, and I think that as we blow this thing up from a scaling perspective, that the 2028 Olympics is a great showcase for us for sure.
And let me just add one thing to that. You say kind of scale. I mean, it kind of goes without saying, but we should still keep saying it, that the total abrogation of our federal government to not only advance the energy transition in the United States, but to kneecap it at every potential opportunity is going to set this country back, a half a century and put us behind China and everywhere else that is moving through the energy transition into a zero carbon economy. And if we're not going to get the replication of the CARB at-birth standard by the national EPA, which is what should be happening, at least I can say, my friend who helped Mark Carney get elected in Canada, they rang us up unsolicited. It was yet another inbound unsolicited call from the Canada Transpo and Canada Energy, because they know, just as we know in California, that they need to expand the energy infrastructure in their ports. It's a big part of Mark Carney's agenda, is actually the expansion of oil service capabilities in Canada's ports. But they know that they need environmental bona fides and coverage to be able to tell that story. They've been watching California and called us proactively to say, it looks to us like this is exactly what Mark needs to go hand in glove with the decision to do that. And let's take that back home here to California. California refineries are going to close. Like, we know that, right? More oil is going to have to be imported into California because no matter how many EVs we got on the road, we need oil. We still live in that world. And we can't flay our oil industry partners as they try to figure out how to meet that need. There's going to have to be more oil imported into California. The at-birth regulation is not the enemy of that, it's the friend of that. We're the biggest ally of the oil industry if they get their shit together and get their narrative right, which is, you want us to bring in what's needed here when refineries close, you want us to come into Richmond and Stockton with our oil. We now know how to do it in a way that doesn't hurt your community. Take away the club, right? Make the environmental justice community applaud the oil industry for responsibly doing what they are actually now doing with us on a daily basis, which is eliminating their emissions when they're at birth. The truth is, this is an opportunity for a true triple bottom line win. And in truth, we ought to be acting as part of the positive narrative in support of what they need to not be the bad actor, right? It's the at-birth regulation that helps the oil industry not be the bad guy for once, right? And that's what we want, because what we want is nobody's living in the Pollyannish fantasy that we are post-oil. We are not even close to it. And so we need to figure out that transition. We need to figure out how to increase those services to meet California's needs without toxifying our environment. And I think we got to get past this old, outmoded argument where these kinds of really smart, effective, and highly successful regulations are like a zero-sum game with a certain industry. The truth is that's a positive flywheel, not a head-to-head. Yeah. And I think it's important for that to be understood. And I think it's really important for communities at large to understand how close we are to a truly incredible story, which is the year before the Olympics, the California ports should be emission-free.
Yeah. Well,
From ships.
Ships, absolutely. Anybody that knows me and has spent time with me knows that I'm always pushing for decarbonization and electrification. No prisoners, got to do it. But this is an area where it's really tough, and we have some folks from C40 here that are working with Beijing and Los Angeles and other ports on the green shipping corridors between there and many other ports. But if we want to prioritize electricity for decarbonizing and electrifying the drayage trucks and the cargo handling equipment to provide cleaner air for the port communities and for frontline communities along the freeways, this is an incredible solution to be able to help us get there. Thank you both for your leadership. I think we've been asking everybody, what's your vision by 2028, but you just gave it to us, Edward, and so you took us out perfectly. Please give a big round of applause to Mike and Edward.
Thanks
Thank
for
you so
having
much.
us. Yep.